Om Agnir Murda Chakshusi Chandra Suryo Vishaha Shrotrivak Vivitasha Vedaha Vayu Prana Hridaya Vishvamasha Padbayam Prativihi Sarvabhutantaratmam Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Verily, that one indwelling being is the consciousness in all things. Fire is its head, the sun and moon its two eyes. The vision of revealed scripture is its cosmic mind. Its arms and legs are the four directions. The wind is its breath, music its voice. The universe is its heart. And from its feet the earth has originated. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Vedanta Siddhanta Nirukti Resha Brahmaiva Jivaham Sakalam Jagatcha Akanda Rupa Stiti Eva Moksho Brahmadvitiye Shrutayaha Pramanam. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. It is the apt and final conclusion of the Vedanta that all is Brahman. Time, space, living beings and the world. Living in constant recognition of this fact is what is called enlightenment. Brahman is pure and perfect, and one without a second. And the revealed scriptures are the sure and certain proof of this fact. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karva Vahai Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vidveshavahai. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. May Brahman protect us, may Brahman sustain us, and may Brahman illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. So we all gathered here today to practice the yoga of insomnia. So we want to stay ever awake. When you're practicing Hatha Yoga and you shift around so many times, it creates a sort of asana vasana, I call it. That is, you become desire vasana to get into an asana. So it's a downside or drawback to practicing Hatha Yoga only, or focusing on it as the highest, because then the body always wants to shift, and we know Shankara has told us that we need to assume ekasana, and the sooner that happens the better, So if you can get into one posture and keep that and not shift around for a long time, then you'll have the best chance of having a deep meditation. The winds of the mind will blow through, and pretty soon the clouds will go by, as the Buddhists say. You watch all that from a distance, and then the mind clears up, and the winds stop, and you're in a perfectly sunny day. It's the blue sky of mind, as the lineages in Tibetan Buddhism would explain it to you. So I'm using that as an analogy for the insomnia of yoga, in the same way that the body needs to take one posture and keep it, ekasana, one, eka. In the same way the mind needs to practice that. It needs to watch itself and catch itself so that it's not assuming different positions against its will. Now, you know, one of the 5 small books that I put out recently, on top of a collection of over a dozen books we've contributed to the Vedanta literature in this day and age, one of them is called Manasana, mental postures. Those are all divided into 3 kinds of postures. One that'll heal you, ones that are salubrious, as we call it, and ones that are truly spiritual, that don't have anything to do with healing because you've gotten over it on all levels, and you're just now enjoying the mind's vistas inside. And then one that's completely sempiternal, I call it, because I had to start with S, you see, salubrious, spiritual, and sempiternal. It's the kind of guy I am, you see. So the sempiternal are these that thou art kind of mantras that you assume. They're positions you get into that you wouldn't need to think about shifting posture of body or mind to be in them. It's just something that comes upon you like it would upon Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. He just all of a sudden had a very high inspired thought. He would just be taken into that and would be gone for a matter of hours in a kind of samadhi around it. In the meantime, you're practicing manana, manasana. Manana means to go deeply into any one thought, because Holy Mother says, it's easy to kill yourself, she said, but it's very hard to kill others. They're not going to want to die, you see. So you just need a little razor knife and it's all over, you see, if that's what you want. But to kill others, you're going to need a sword, a knife, a shield, a spear, an Uzi nowadays maybe. Any weapons you can get a hold of to amass. So she's of course talking about trying to kill your ego. Kill your own ego is relatively simple, but to kill the egos of others, well, that's the job of gurus or acharyas or Dharma teachers, to try and squash that ego down at least a bit, so that that background consciousness that we just chanted about, that's whose head is fire and whose eyes are the sun and the moon, these very high inspired thoughts that come from the Upanishads will come through that background consciousness. So then these very high postures that possibly you don't assume them anymore, that they begin to happen to you because of spiritual suggestion. You've made yourself so open to suggestion that they come upon you. I was speaking about this just the other day, that after 50 years of practice now I have some states of mind that come upon me that take me over rather quickly, because my mind is used to getting into the Dharma, as you know, and some of these thoughts are very profound and lead to a chain of thoughts, that a kind of natural manana that just clicks right in, sort of like a conveyor belt or something, just, and takes you to a very deep level of manasana. So I was saying that sometimes it happens in an inopportune moment. Like you have to give a talk, or you're in front of a public audience, or something happens, and all of a sudden this state of mind comes upon you. Oh no, not now, you say. You see, can we put this off till later? I'd like to have this spiritual experience, but not now. I've got things to do. Well, we saw Sri Ramakrishna in that state all the time, and of course in a much more intense way. And he wasn't having to be on a clock, or he was just in front of people. And sometimes even just seeing people or being amidst lots of people, he would go into a high state because he saw God in all of them. And he wasn't seeing personalities as a speaker would, you see, or something, or a lecturer. So he really had that wide open vision that came from a very high manasana. So anyway, I bring this forward because the mental posture needs to be one and singular, and then your mind needs to be one and singular. So if you can sit through an hour and a half of my talk, my discourse, my Dharma talk, without nodding off, or without eyes getting heavy, eyelids getting heavy and so forth, without bringing your clothespins with you, then you're attaining an hour and a half of this singular state of yogic insomnia. So you want to, the trick to this, and it's the trick with the asana too, is that when you sit down, you don't move from the moment you settle in. You're allowed to move at first. Oh, this, I got a little itch here, you see, and I've got to, make sure that everything is nicely proportioned here in my inner house, you see, and my outer house has to follow suit. So now I sit and I freeze. It's the same with the mind. If the mind starts to fall asleep, and within 3 or 4 minutes of listening to some dharmic words, which you're going to find out about today, some very powerful words, then you know to catch it right then. See, and then hold it and don't fall asleep a second time. So that would be one of the early tricks of training in yogic insomnia, which is a term that Lex Hickson, our SRV founder, coined. I had never heard anyone use it before he said it to us. He says, I enjoy yogic insomnia, so it means an ever awake state. And Krishna does mention that, and so do other seers in the scriptures. So all of this I bring up as a preamble, my usual introduction to the mind as heaven. And we'll see through various charts over the next 4 weeks, because it's a 4-class series. We'll look at this from different perspectives. And we're taking it rather literally. And I made a new chart about it that I wanted to reveal in ta-da style, because it was just finished yesterday, and came out to my liking. It's visually, of course. The visuals are important to me. And it's appropriately titled to head all the charts that we'll see in this class. Mind is the kingdom of heaven. And I think the closest thing we can identify with, and it is Christ's sayings in the Bible about kingdom of heaven. One of these starts off, neither shall they say, lo here, or lo there, for behold, the kingdom of God is within you. So today, in our perspective, and we have to shift to the bottom of the chart all of a sudden for this, a quote which I coined just recently and have been using about sort of like what do we mean by within? You see, not lo here or lo there, like oh look up or look back or look down, you see, for heaven and hell, but look within. So where is the within? It can't be in the body because that's just a bunch of filthy stuff in there. Interesting only to people who like to study cadavers and see what makes things tick. To a certain extent, that's, of course, a secular science. But it's not the kingdom of heaven, for sure, when you get into it. It's a marvelous mechanism, but I was just listening to a wise lady say just the other day that she realized in one deep meditation that the body was just kind of a tube, and things were going in one end and coming out the other. This is a direct quote from her. A tube. It's like sort of like Sri Krishna saying "Vak Napok," in Bengali, men are mere worms. The body is just kind of worm-like, isn't it? You can see them squirming by the millions in battlefields, and oozing blood and pus and excreta and so forth. So it's not a very pretty picture, and of course it connects very nicely with samsara, the battleground of suffering, or the ocean of suffering. But going in one end, coming out the other, food, waste, breath, you name it. air, oxygen, sights and sounds, things going in one and then coming out. But when you have this vision and you say, I'm not the body, and then you see that there's a consciousness that's witnessing all of this movement, and it's still. It's static. It doesn't have any movement of its own. And you claim that for the ground upon which all these other tubes are being born, you see. So that accents the point nicely of this class, is that where is within? It would have to be then in our mind. And Vedanta, you know, makes a distinction between mind and brain. Because if you just relegate everything to the brain, then you have the 5 outer senses, and you have the 5 outer elements that comprise the object that the senses get attached to, and we know that how that goes in spiritual life. People get attachment to external things only. Or as Ramakrishna said, like the dinosaurs looking only at Earth, they became Earth. And now they're powering our fuel tanks and so forth, our cars and automobiles. So if you attention goes to Earth, it becomes Earth. But if the attention goes inward, then you become more aware of the origin of all things on Earth. Purnamadaha, Purnamidam, Purnat, Purnamudachyate. The outer has come from the inner. They're both infinite. But being infinite, only infinite remains. So this chart is based a bit. I could have used that quote from the Upanishads, one of the peace chants, but I've used it so often, and we've taken opportunity to expect it and do manana on it, which is you should do on it. The chart follows that kind of way of thinking. So let me read you this bottom quote that kind of summates what I've just said about what we see today, or what I've seen today, that could help to qualify and clarify this statement 2,000 years ago of Jesus when he said, the kingdom of heaven is within you. I said here, quote, science has us looking backwards in time, as if we were once animals. The contemporary religious view has us looking up towards the skies, as if heaven were somewhere above us. But these are both outer realms. The kingdom of heaven lies within, and the only real within is in the mind, in its dreams, its visions, its projections, and its thinking process. So the real within is then in the mind, and in the mind, if you take the first of these, its dreams, then you might as well conclude right now that if you go into dream tonight, you're going to another realm of your own consciousness, and there you're dreaming about various beings in other worlds, and these are different kinds of heavens that you're visiting. There would be no other going to heaven than going within, because the mind has projected all those worlds. And we'll take some charts that shows that. The word in Sanskrit is called sankalpa. Sankalpa means kalpa, time. Kalpanika means imaginings in time. So it's all imaginings in time that the mind's doing. So it would project time in order for it to enjoy time, and it would project space in order for it to visit space, and name and form the same. It would then people these time-oriented, time-permeated spatial realms, which we're going to be calling the kingdoms of heaven within, with name and form, names and forms. And then this is where karma starts, cause and effect. So we know that's the 5-fold definition of Maya that Swami Vivekananda gave to us when he came here to the West in 1893. That Maya, they were calling it illusion, and he said that it's not going to cut it. It only describes sort of the problematic part of Maya. But the factual part of Maya that you want to look at is that it consists of name, form, time, space, and causality. Nama, Rupa, Desha, Kala, Nimitta. And that statement, of course, has been given as far back as Shankara and Gaudapada and so forth. But Swamiji put it together in a nice 5-fold way, because we know there are 5 senses and 5 elements that they seek after, and 5 kinds of prana that operate our outer body, and 5 fingers and 5 toes and so forth. There's just these sets of 5s called the quintuplication process, by which consciousness comes from its formless state, gets into form, and then by negating the 5s, or dropping them like stages of a rocket, like a 5-fold rocket, it'll just drop them as it returns to formlessness. And all of this happens without any birth and death going on. The birth and death and the change that's going on in this process is like that body that's a tube, where things are going in, coming out, and it just keeps on repeating that, replicating that, by the millions and billions of tubes, over millions and billions of years, over endless time, from time out of mind, the expression goes. So in this way then we see how sankalpa, the word, imaginings in time, begins to cover some of these explanations that are powerful words in which we want to use to prove our point. The mind as heaven within. Mind is the kingdom of heaven within. So this means we're going to be accounting for a part of ourselves that we're not usually accounting for. Our senses are connected to the mind, to the brain, that is, if you're thinking only in terms of physics and chemistry and biology and so forth. But inner biology is not just the enumeration of how many kinds of wood there are and how many kinds of metals there are and how many kinds of chemicals there are. That's Maya, that's varieties, Vaicitra. If you just take the physical and take it apart, it'll keep you going forever, categorizing things. But the great categorization is done by the cosmic biologist by accounting for the 24 cosmic principles out of which all of Earth came. All the metals, all the woods. So if you don't want to stumble on your inner journey, involution back to the self, then you're not going to get stuck in enumerating all of these varieties. Tantra calls that Vaicitra. It's one of the characteristics of Maya that keeps the soul bound to external things. You're just going to say, that's earth, and that's prana, and those are the senses, and there are 5 inner senses, and 5 inner elements, tanmatras, and then you go in to the classical Samkhya way, because Vedantas always speak with a list, you see, Samkhya. Their list is Samkhya. So this 24 cosmic principles go in, and it's the least encumbered of varieties, Vaicitra, in which you make this inner journey. So if you want to do that and you don't want to stumble, then you'll slim it all down, and then you'll find out where the impediments are to your understanding of your origin. It'll be the origin of bodies, these tubes that we're talking about, that we inhabit, and the origin of life force. Immediately you're taken beyond atomic power. When you talk about pranic power, it's not the atomic particle we should be concerned with, it's the atmic particle. Not atomic, atmic. See how close they are. So we want to go toward the conscious particle, and that's going to lead us more towards mind and intelligence. Now mind is a sort of pivotal place. It's a stopping place. It's a heaven. As you notice, most people today want to achieve that. Heaven is their goal for hundreds and thousands of Christians, and probably Hindus too. So in this series of classes, we want to point out certain luminaries who went beyond the mind, and who, as they did go beyond the mind, and all the lokas, I mean, there are different words you can use here now, lokas, bardos, akashas, realms, worlds, and we know how many realms there are here, how many bits of life force there are in even a handful of soil. If you go out and pick a big bunch of grass or soil and study it, even with your eyes, what to speak of a microscope, you'll see all these various bits of Shakti power in it, you see we say, or prana. And that's just in the exterior. In the interior, as science has shown, the particles are also permeated by power. And this power has become a meditation for them. So when you're studying those forms and the power of those forms, that in India that's always been seen to be a study of the occult, see, because you begin to use it for various gains in nature, as man is doing in this day and age, trying to dominate over nature and use it for gaining pleasures and satisfaction and so forth. In the Bhoga Marga, which you'll never reach enlightenment by following the path of enjoyment, you have to reach the goal by following the path of knowledge, Jnana Marga. That gets rid of the ignorance, Krishna says in the Gita. So you're going to have to use Vidyamaya to get rid of avidyamaya, or Prakasha Shakti to get rid of Vikshepa Shakti and Avarana Shakti. There are higher aspects in everything, and mind connects to intelligence. When it does connect to intelligence, that's when all of this becomes, the game is really afoot, you see. The higher aspects of benefit get bestowed upon the seer, who can use the mind as a gateway or a doorway to heaven and pass through heaven. So this is a kind of an explanation of why in Vedanta we, as my teachers used to say, I'm not interested in a post-mortem emancipation, and I'm not interested in heaven. As he had already seen in his what was to be 94, 95-year-old lifetime as a monk, he had already seen beyond Bhur, Bhuva, Swaha, Bhur, Bhuva, Swaha, these three worlds which pretty much comprise, in a nutshell, and explain in a nutshell, the kingdoms of heaven, Bhur, Bhuva, Swaha. Because there's enough to be said, probably, or seen, that we could say that this world is a kind of heaven too. And it can also be a kind of hell, which is a quote that I've used there on the chart too, which we'll get to. So science has us looking backwards as if time were real, and it makes us think in terms of being an evolved species from other species, like we were once animals. The truth in Vedanta is that you were always the Atman, and you assumed forms. So whether or not you were actually an animal in the past, or whether you were always a human, means a human either on earth or in heaven with your ancestors, is a point that's sort of secondary. The real point is that they're making the declaration that thou art, that you're not the passing, changing varieties in the bodies and so forth, and the egos that inhabit the bodies, but you're always the witness. And they always accent that by using the term sakshi bhutam. So we salute the leader of our soul, whose grace our ignorance is dispelled, who is beyond good and bad, pleasure and pain, life and death, and all their pairs of opposites. We recognize that one as the only witness, sakshi bhutam. Bhavati tam trigunarahitam sadgurum tam namami. May that one free us from delusion and free us from death and fear and doubt. So these beautiful slokas, which are just a series of very powerful words that come from the thinking process of higher mind, are put together, and one of the connections we don't make is that these words actually produce the heavens. Out here, we look at the object with the senses and don't realize that the senses have, in accord with the mind, have projected the object. We think the object has an individual existence apart from us. But we ourselves have fashioned the object and the worlds that the objects are a part of, and then we come in from outside and look at them, and we take on a body and we enjoy the objects. This process is laden with the problem of the Bhoga Marga, or the path of enjoyment, and it takes us away from witness consciousness, sakshi bhutam. You begin to identify with the objects. The seer begins to identify with the scene, and then that's the road to ruin. Everyone says so. Sri Krishna in the Gita, the sevenfold road to ruin, he calls it. Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras, Here the seers become attached to the scene, and now it's become the scene. It's obscene, really, as I used to say. And so you have to reverse the process and detach yourself from what is seen and know yourself to be the seer or the witness. This is spiritual sadhana. This is all practice. A practice that they say you shouldn't have had to have done in the first place, because you should have never fallen into that misconception. And in order to not fall into that conception, what are you going to have to do or attain? Realize that the external has come from the internal. And the internal is consciousness. Well, there are some leaps that are going to take place from consciousness to intelligence, from intelligence to mind, from mind to energy, and from energy to elements, senses and elements. So basically that's kind of a rendering, a fivefold rendering of the 24 cosmic principles, these leaps that consciousness takes to get into the tube of the body. And then get lodged there like a worm in a cocoon. So it has to break free of that and fly inward back to its mother, back to the source of things. This is all not that difficult to say, a little bit more difficult to comprehend, very difficult to put into practice to get free. It's got a subtle difference, a subtle difficulty involved in it. So you're going to have to practice the yoga of insomnia, be right attentive to it all, especially to words. Now, the long buzzsaw chain of words that go on in minds around the world are all in secular topics. Sometimes the mind is bored with them, sometimes the mind's interested in them. But there's a kind of interest that needs to be developed by the individual who's called spiritual seeker, who begins to dote upon these words. And some of these words are pain-causing. They're negative words that bring about a beneficial result. What's sweet in the beginning turns sour later, Sri Krishna says in the Gita. But what's sour in the beginning tends to turn sweet later. So what's sour in the beginning means you're going to have to hear these words like sankalpa and samsara and samskara and so forth, and use them to turn around and face off with these impediments that you're dealing with inside. You can only run away from them so long. So you can only have pleasure and not without pain for only so long. And you can only have riches for so long before these very riches ruin you, lead you down the road to ruination. Whereas if you renounced the riches and just lived on very little, you'd live the stereotypical lifetime of a Chinese Taoist. You see, you know, you'd as the man who got the Chinese Taoist who got the boon from God. What would you like? I want to eat sumptuous food on gold plates with my grandchildren. See, clever da baga. You see, basically he's getting three wishes at once, isn't he? In one sentence. Because if he says my grandchildren, he's got old age. And if he says gold plates, it means he's rich. And if he has sumptuous food, then what else does he need, you see? So, but to do that yogically and dharmically, and to be able to pass it on, or pass away from it without attachment, and to become caught in it at the end of your life, those are two different, very different things. So this is why the practice of yoga is there to sustain us and to free us. My teacher himself used to say, if we knew who we were, which is the Atman, or if we know who we are, to put it in present tense, then we wouldn't have to do spiritual practice. But it is definitely not the condition of people today to be able to avoid spiritual practice and think that they can get enlightened. That's a grand misnomer and a misconception that's leading people who are assuming themselves to be enlightened into dire straits, spiritually speaking. a kind of spiritual egotism. I see some of these people online, because I'm also teaching the Dharma and so forth, and they're prescribing to their devotees that they smoke marijuana, or that they take ayahuasca, or they do various things that the Indian seers would never allow, not the illumined ones. So a sort of detachment from things negative is going to have to happen on two levels. First, you're going to have to hear the negative teaching which slaps your hand, No, don't do that, And then you're going to have to actually, once you've discriminated, make the detachment real. It may take you 12 stages, according to Vedanta, to make detachment a living entity, a quality that you've attained. 12 stages, including the very meek, and then the middling, and then the very advanced, para-vairagya they call it, or tivya vairagya, beings who have renounced all the worlds. So in order for a being to renounce the worlds, they're not going to look back and believe in evolution. They may believe in evolution on the level that evolution takes place. But they know that change is all illusion, and it's always coming in cycles. Those are two very important points. Number one, it's all based in change, shifting sands. And all the great souls from Christ backwards and Christ forward have said the same. You do not build your house on shifting sands. So that's number one point, that you have to become aware of the changing Maya around you. And then number two, you're going to have to practice spiritual disciplines in order to free yourself from those kinds of misconceptions and attain the stationary self, Atman they call it. So you can't do that if you're looking back in time and believing that time is real or actual. So these high manasanas we're talking about, one of them is that thou art changeless, thou art indestructible, conditionless, stationary, ever stationary. There are many of them that are just statements of the absolute faith in non-origination, non-change, that the soul has put on, and the two eyes turned one when it did that, and it saw itself as the author of all this, also saw itself as the witness. Simultaneously, you're the author of all the worlds, and you're also the witness of them. So those great souls who saw themselves to be the author didn't want to own them anymore, didn't want to project them anymore, didn't want to play in them anymore. And if they did come to play, it was like Sri Ramakrishna was so good at that lila, it was to show others that they could transcend the worlds. You should live in the world like a duck lives in the water. The water doesn't get in the duck gets in the water. Or you should live in the world like the turtle who just laid its eggs on the sand, It's in the water of the world, but its mind is always on its eggs in the sand. That's Brahman back there, It goes ahead swimming. There are so many ways in which Sri Ramakrishna, in his play, showed us that non-duality was the highest truth, and that without it, you always ran the risk of getting attached to form, and name, and time, and space, and causation, karma, that you would suffer in heaven and on earth. Now, this chart, you see it here, is at proportions so that it has 3 levels. Here's some grand mansions. Let me read this other quote at the top of the chart. In my Father's house are many mansions, or abiding places, homes of rest, of peace, and of sojourn. Now, I could start discoursing on all 3 of those, homes of peace, of rest, and of sojourn. You'd have to bring in the principle, the relative principle of rebirth. It's not an absolute rebirth because change doesn't really happen in Brahman. Yet, beings who don't know their Brahman will distance themselves from Brahman and take on forms. They'll take on forms usually in these 3 worlds, Bur, bhuva, and svar. 3 lokas. Those are also 3 great words. We'll look at that in a minute, that just by pronouncing them bring on these states of higher manasana. See? If you were to say, if the Trinity were to think at the beginning, you see, of time, time does never end, of course, and have a beginning, but the beginning of a cosmic cycle, if the Trinity were to think all of a sudden, like Lord Brahma, Bur, then that word would effloresce out from the great mind of Brahma, which is Satyaloka, and then it would take on vibrations, and those vibrations would start very subtle and refined, and then would come down to grosser and grosser type, and the very vibration itself would produce this world Bur. And so by this series of vibrations coming from a word, a power word, bijam it's called, you can also reverse the process by, in your mantra, by saying your bijam and connecting it to that very principle. Now, there are 5 types of yogis, according to the father of Vedanta and the father of yoga, Vedavas and Patanjali. And 3 of them never make the goal. One of those is those who do the mantra without knowing what the mantra means. One of them is the ones who use intoxicants. They never make the goal of enlightenment. So the only 2 that make the goal are ones who do the practice of austerity, the austere practice of cutting the mind down. Practice meditation and cut time down is the line of one song. So you don't actually know it, but if you go into meditation or deep sleep, you cut time away. It doesn't exist anymore. You may not come out of deep sleep. That is, you might die from the physical body. You'll be one of the things ejected out the bottom of that tube. You see, you'll give it up. And you'll go to a place inside of your own consciousness. And if you don't cut the silver cord and die, then you'll come back through the dreaming process and then back to the waking process, see, from the deep sleep process. And these forms and these names, all buried in the green mossy ground, according to the bluegrass song we used to sing, you see, are all according to a series of vibrations that came from great words, like Om. Otherwise, he wouldn't have said, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That's 3 things he's talking about there. So, in my Father's house, there are many mansions, or abiding places, places of rest, of peace, and sojourn. I won't take all 3 of those apart, but enough to say that that last one, sojourn, is called rebirth and reincarnation. And it's called play in the fields of the Lord. And it's called sankalpa in Sanskrit. And it's called moving amongst the bardos in Tibetan Buddhism, different phases of time, and on and on. It's going different akashas according to Vedanta, different kinds of space, you see. It's like outer space, the inner space, then the next inner space, then the next inner space. Oh, there's my Atman. See, I'll clean that up later. That means I'll have to involve and put it all back together because it's become fragmented, you see. So you've got 5 akashas basically, just like 5 Russian dolls. And we've had that chart up enough and studied it. So if you want to put it down into 3, that's basically what you do, although there's 5 inner worlds that transcend these 3. So I'm just giving you sort of the dynamics of Bur Bhuva Swaha, because it's going to come up again. And so you can see in my Father's house how many mansions there are. And 7 seems to be a list. I looked into it deeper last week, and Judaism has 7 mansions, and Christianity has 7, Taoism has 7. Basically, there are these, the chakras are 7 in Kundalini. Basically, there's this general agreement on the subdivision of worlds. Now, this is cosmology. This is not Advaita Vedanta. But my feeling in this day and age particularly is that unless you know the cosmology, then if you've forgotten the cosmology, you've forgotten the breadcrumbs that you left for yourself when you left the mansion, the house of Brahman. The house of Brahman would be a house of formlessness, and all the mansions inside would be these various worlds. So when you left them, the Divine Mother Shakti gave you the power to do that. She said, here, take these breadcrumbs. You see, there are 7 of them, and make sure you leave them for yourself. You see, especially if you're going to Burloka, you see. Because in Burloka, they're going to try and convince you were an animal once. See? And that's no good for your spiritual evolution. You're always the Atman, always will be the Atman, never been anything else but the Atman. And that's the Advaitic truth of it all. When Sri Ramakrishna told that to Swami Vivekananda, the young Narendra, he said, here, I'll tell you the truth in one sentence, in a few words, powerful words. Now you keep that in your wearing cloth, and you go anywhere you want around the world, and you'll be free, you'll be safe. Just by remembering that one quintessential fact, see. But that one quintessential fact of Advaita Vedanta is the most difficult thing to hold on to when you're in the realm of Bur, because they've divided everything into so many varieties, and it's called science, and it's called intelligence. But we have an entirely different name and meaning and definition for the word intelligence. For us, intelligence is Chit Shakti. And Chit Shakti is the power that pervades all the worlds. It's what you're, out here, if you looked into an object, you'd see atomic particles. That's her in her atomic form. But she's telling you, go deeper, go further, go further. You've come as far out as you possibly can, and look what's happening. You're using it for power, like naughty little boys. You see, setting off firecrackers in somebody's yard and running away laughing. You're blowing up things with these atomic particles, killing people and causing karma for yourself and others, like naughty little boys. Shame on you. Non-violence is the first premise of yoga and of India's teachings. And so we want to practice this ahimsa, but we shouldn't have to practice it. Not doing harm and ahimsa are 2 different things, you see. So you have to hold a deeper perspective. Ahimsa is sort of an agreed upon truth among the seers, you see. Because why? Because you can't really harm anything. There's no individual thing to harm and no individual person doing the harming. The Atman cannot be cleaved with a sword, it cannot be drowned with water, it cannot be burned with fire, it cannot be shot by an arrow. Krishna telling Arjuna on the battlefield, go and engage in the war. Those princes in the other battlefield and all of those warriors, there never was a time that they didn't exist. And there will never come a time when they don't exist. So go, dispatch them. So that's the ahimsa of non-duality. There is no harm to be done to anything. And if your mind has transcended the areas of war, because all 3 of these realms are subject to war, what do we say when we think of these 3 realms? Peace, peace, peace. Shanti, shanti, shanti. We're not saying that for these realms, necessarily. We're saying it for these mansions in the Father's house. I was using that, I was misquoting it. I think it was okay to do so. I was saying my Father's mansion has many chambers, because I'd heard that before. But they like it in Christendom to say, my Father's house has many chambers. So I said, well, great. That gives us a better idea of what we're talking about here. In fact, probably it would be good to, before I take us in all sorts of different directions, which are all connected, I hope, to take a few more of these quotes here. You see the one by Lord Buddha right under this Buvar loka. You see, Bur has all of these houses which are very rich, the houses of the rich, you see. And then you can see overlapping it and flowing into it and flowing back out of it is the Bhuvar Loka. And we say here, humans, animals, insects, plants, basically, and then microorganisms and so forth would infuse the Bhuvar Loka. And you'd have to take on a physical form to enjoy that, or to suffer it, or both, probably be better to say. But if the Bhuvar Loka, and and I can't help but make the subtle distinction between waking and dreaming here, because you've got to keep in mind that all of this is, mind is the kingdom of heaven. And this is the lower heaven, and this is a little bit higher heaven, and this is a very high heaven out of which you have a chance to pass into beyond rebirth. Now, I've noticed some of the interpretations today is if you get beyond the Bhuvar Loka, see there's one set of houses there, chambers, another set there, a castle, and there's another internal gate there leading in. And some say if you get beyond Swarloka, you won't have to be reborn in them again. But others are interpreting that you have to go up to Satya Loka or Tapar Loka to be able to be free of having to be reborn again. I kind of prefer the latter myself, is that you have more of a choice from Maharloka, where the sages, saints, and rishis take their subtle bodies. They take them there so that they can return to earth on purpose. So they're not dragged back to earth by their karma, like the mongoose is dragged from its hole in the wall by a brick on its tail, as Shyamakrishna's story used to relate to us. The kids catch it finally. It's hard to get. They try a victor's tail because they know it's going to get away. But they've got it trapped, you see. If it goes up the hole, even the strongest mongoose will get pulled out of its hole after a while when its claws and legs get tired by the weight of the brick. So that's the weight of karma that pulls you back down to these three realms. Okay, so a general description of that, but I was on my way to give you this statement out of the Dhammapada, and all of the statements on this chart relate to this fact that mind is the kingdom of heaven. So here Buddha says, beings of this world, he's talking about Bhuvar Loka and Bhuvar Loka, beings of this world are blind. Few are those who can see things the way they are. As birds escape from nets, rare are those who go to heaven. The miserly do not go to the world of the gods, which would be, you see, higher. And the foolish do not seek liberation when they're here. You see, they're seeking bondage, really, to objects. Only the wise become happy in the next world. Those who control the mind, which wanders the worlds, but which resides in the cavern of the heart, will free themselves from all kinds of bondages. So, do we like Lord Buddha as people raised in Christendom? Of course we do. Is there any difference between their teachings? They teach by stories, they teach by metaphors, they teach by analogies, anecdotes, but impregnated in them all is this high-minded spirituality, you see, which beings in these lower realms are not yet educated in. They've forgotten themselves in the rush for pleasures and objects, their desires, their attachments, and the beautiful things, obviously, that these worlds can offer. So, but remember, what's sweet in the beginning can turn sour later. So that's a negative teaching you're going to have to listen to. So there you have two instances from the Gospels of Christ and two from the Dhammapada that I put together there that are leaning ever so obviously towards this fact. Like when Lord Buddha says here, only the wise are happy in the next world. Those who control the mind which wanders the worlds, but which resides in the cavern of the heart, they become truly free of bondages, you see. So the mind wanders the worlds. And we're saying, to put a capper on it, that the mind projected the worlds before it wandered in it. And that the worlds were all held in abeyance as seeds. Just like everything here is held in abeyance as seeds. Forests, fruits, flowers, embryo, whatever you want to look at, it's all coming from seeds, and it's all coming from something invisible we don't see until it all of a sudden manifests, voila. at the sleight of the hand of Maya in the physical world, and we don't question the origin of it. And we don't have any wisdom given to us at our birth and as we're raised, particularly in this yuga, about our origins, as if they don't exist. How can, unless you're a non-dualist, how can there be anything originless? It's only when you get to the ultimate state that you can talk about non-origination. In the meantime, you're a pseudo-Advaitist, conjecturing about philosophy. You haven't looked into Advaita and Vishishta Advaita yet and connected the dots and found the breadcrumbs that will take you to the highest state. And this is all connecting the dots. You know, games like Monopoly and chess, and connecting the dots and puzzles, these are all symbols for reality. If Sri Ramakrishna saw anyone playing a game, like sometimes I think there's this game called Golakdam or something in the Gospel, see? And Sri Ramakrishna saw them playing it, and the idea is that there was a game board and a circle and pieces on it, sort of like where our games came from, that kind of idea. So the people with the pieces rolled a die and of some kind, and then the pieces would advance, and some of them would get to the center, you see, and then they're out of the game. But the winner was the one who took the longest and didn't get to the center. They stayed in the game. So the whole thing is based upon staying in Maya to enjoy. If you go through too quick and you roll the bigger numbers, you see, you get to this middle point and you're out of the game. That's it. You lose. So you can see the whole orientation, even in India at that time, around games was to stay in the world and have fun, to enjoy, to follow the Bhoga Marga. So Sri Ramakrishna was looking onto that game once, and he said, "Oh yes, go on playing, that's fine. I'm a horrible player of that game. I get out right away. You see, I can't play that game very well. I'm out within a few rolls." You see. And so they began to understand, that he was just totally transcendental in his perspective, and he probably wasn't even who he was standing in front of them, floating in air, as it were, this kind of soul that was open to spiritual suggestion, as I was telling you earlier. So let's see what Sri Krishna says about here. He's at the apex of between Bhur and Bhuvar Loka. Now to explain the kind of outlay of this chart for you and put the four other worlds on the side, because we're not going to take them up as much yet. Because I think you get out of the idea of heaven when you get out of Svarloka. And it becomes less of dreams and more of a state of consciousness or intelligence. But Sri Krishna says at this juncture, the paths of the dark and of the light, of smoke and of the sun, I created these two paths in the beginning. By them, incarnate beings move, coming forth to enjoy, or, having become fulfilled, going inwards to never return to the realms of external embodiment again. Path of the sun and the path of smoke, path of dark and the path of light. These are the two eternal paths. I put them together at the beginning. By some, the yogis go and come back, and other beings too. And by others, they go never to return again. Now, these yogis that come and go back, they're doing it by will, you see. They're free. So they can take the smoky path to come back if they so want to, because they have to take on a body and be born in a family and grow up and fulfill their message. They're doing this basically to help beings out of the illusion of finitude and into the great infinite. But others get caught in the samsaric wheel between these three, and they're pulled from birth to death and death to birth. See, you know what I'm thinking of right now when I say that. Swami Vivekananda's great saying, "Strike off thy fetters, bonds that bind thee down, shining gold, darker, baser ore, good, bad, and all the dual throng. No slave is slave, caressed or whipped not free. And strike off thy fetters," see, and let darkness go the will of the wisp, which leads with blinking light, you see, to pile more gloom on gloom. this thirst for life forever quench? Why? Because it drags from birth to death, and death to birth to soul. Beautiful, powerful words that Swami Vivekananda put together for us in English in the Song of the Sannyasin, the Song of the Ever-Free Soul, to tell us what he was experiencing when he was on earth in his brief 39 years he spent here. So there you have sayings from Jesus, sayings from Buddha, and sayings from Sri Krishna, in 3 different religions, if you will. Now, from Christendom again down here, John in 3:6 says, "That which is born of the flesh is flesh, and that which is born of spirit is spirit. Then marvel not when I say unto thee, thou must be born again." So he's talking about a kind of birth that we would in India call twice born. So the Brahmin priests would get that opportunity for a spiritual body. And so they would not be born again in the same old condition again, but they would have graduated to a new birth. So this is the birth of baptism, birth that the other John was so famous for, John the Baptist. So basically we see here that he's telling us in no uncertain terms that if you're born of flesh, then you're the flesh, you see. But if you're born of the spirit, you're the spirit. That's, again, 2 things there. The path of light, the path of darkness, the path of the blind, as Buddha says, the path of the wise. You can see how throughout the ages, whether it's early on in terms of Krishna, or a little later on in terms of Buddha, a little later on in terms of Jesus, and a little later still in terms of John, that these correlate across the board as ways of saying not only duality is present in these worlds, but that it's all in the thinking process. It's the entrance into it and the freedom from it is all in your own mind. And that's why in Advaita Vedanta we would connect waking, dreaming, and deep sleep to these 3 worlds, generally speaking. Deep sleep would go beyond to a more formless state, which would probably coordinate more with the upper 4 lokas, which at this time, the time of Mahachamasya, the upper 3 worlds weren't even seen yet in this age. Out of the Taittiriya Upanishad here, in this chart, which we won't go to yet, but you will see soon in this class, Mahachamasya saw this world, Maharloka, from his meditation. And so he saw the 3 worlds had an end, and that he could enter into this 4th world, you see. And but he wasn't yet aware, no one is yet aware yet, that had been recorded of the upper of these 7 worlds yet. That's the way time veils things. Maya veils things, and beings have to pierce through in ages to get to this truth. From age to age, if you want to quote Krishna again from the Gita, from age to age I embody myself forth. Because all these worlds are constantly changing. And so I need to come forth and embody myself forth to awaken the sleeping. Over the long efflux of time, he says, Maya has taken hold of the minds of people. So I have to embody myself again and again. And it's just like saying, I've not come to destroy the words of the prophets, but to further them, to reveal them. Thousands of years before that, Krishna said the same thing as Jesus, that he had to come and bring these teachings back to the fore, because the Dharma declines, and then it comes back again in a new form. So this would be one of the reasons why souls would follow the paths of light and darkness in any given birth, and be free in their choices about it. Take on the body on purpose for helping others out of darkness, because it drags from birth to death, and death to birth the soul. But he conquers all who conquers self. Know this and never yield, Swamiji said to end that verse. He conquers all who conquers self. That's That can be interpreted either as you conquer the lower self by the higher self, or you realize the higher self. And in that way, you would be a candidate for thine eye be single kind of consciousness. And you would see all the worlds as projected by yourself, number one, and number two, as being unreal. Because you'd know all the connections between them, and you'd know how they came into being, say from great utterances like Om, and how they connected, they all connected. And eventually this is going to give you the highest realization of all this Brahman. In the interim, it's going to make you aware that all of this is not real. That's called neti neti. And you're going to want to detach from it. Because if you detach from it, you're going to get the best view of it. You get yourself above time. And that's why Lord Buddha at the end of his life was saying, get out of the river and sit on the banks for a while. Because if you're in the river of time, you're going around in circles. And everything's going around with you in circles. And you never run into it, you see. You're in the river of time, the cosmic knowledge of the cosmic principles are behind you, and you're, or ahead of you, and you never quite come to them. But if you got out of the banks and watch a while, oh, there goes the cosmic principles, see? And the Divine Mother who animates them. Oh, look at that, you see. I'm stationary and I got out of movement. I meditated, and instead of following the path of karma all the time, karma kanda and jnana karma, I took the path of jnana kanda, and I saw that everything was constantly in cycles, and at that point I lost my desire for it. Lost my desire for it. The light is off it. The shine is off it, Vivekananda said toward the end of his life. First I came here and I saw everything, I was going to help everyone, yada yada and so forth, but now, getting on in life, the shine is all off of it. I'm looking forward to the beautiful voice of Sri Ramakrishna again, who taught me when I was a young man, who loved me far more than my parents could ever love me. So these great beings, and he being the seventh rishi of Satyaloka, Sri Ramakrishna said, he was the highest of all the rishis. He was the Sapta rishi par excellence, because there's a rishi that oversees each of these 7 worlds. And you would want to appeal to them. You might want to appeal to the beings who are holding them up too, you see, because they're very powerful. Guardians at the gate kind of idea, that you're going to want to take advantage of these great beings. And a small fruit comes to these beings who worship animals, plants, insects, humans. Small fruit comes to those who worship spirits, semi-divine beings. Small fruit comes to those who worship the gods and goddesses, the Gandharvas, the Apsaras, and Indra. So the greater fruit comes when you transcend the 3 worlds. Shanti, Shanti, Shantihi. You get peace that passes all understanding eventually, not just the peace that is interrupted by war. Because even the gods and demigods are warring between these 2 worlds, they say. These semi-divine beings are not all bad like Christian devil, but they want power and they want lands. And it's another way of saying the kingdom of heaven within, you see, is because if you were a prakriti laya, if you were a person who knew about these worlds but didn't know about Brahman yet, wasn't interested in your own true nature, then you'd be wanting to grasp at the kingdoms of heaven. And when you got proficient enough at doing that, you'd come onto earth and you'd want to grasp at the same thing. Attila the Hun, Napoleon, Alexander the Great. I mean, start naming on all the hands of people who want to come and dominate and enjoy the worlds and grab lands and resources. Let's just throw America in there as the most recent example of that. Naughty little children playing with firecrackers and flexing their muscles in front of others to scare them. Advertising about war, joining your military and all of that stuff. See, just brainwashing you. They're all caught in Maya, stuck deep in Maya, and will never lift a finger to do anything truly beneficial for anyone. They'll just go on in their delusion that they think they're helping others by their antics. Only the nonviolent stance, the truthful stance, the non-covetous stance, and the moderate stance, and the renunciation of commerce stances are going to stand you in good stead as a truly spiritual being. What are those? The 5 yamas of yoga. 5. Ahimsa, satya, asteya, and so forth. See? And all the way up to aparigraha. See, where, commerce, they're trying to engage me in commerce, in constant gaining of monies and goods. Oh yeah, that's going to make me forget Brahman. And it starts by making you forget your last lifetime and all the dharma you learned there from your teacher. Is that a good thing? You want to start all over again? Studying the books again of secular knowledge, which is all knowledge that's already within you, because you were the one that projected it, along with your fellow cohorts in this game of Maya, this play of Maya. So what you want to do then is realize the true nature of yourself, and like Sri Ramakrishna said, as soon as they put him in school, he walked out. Oh, I see, you're just trying to teach me mother's wisdom so that I can store up bananas and rice. I see. So he said, I don't use mother wisdom for that. Mother wisdom is sacred. See? I use it for a much higher purpose. This was a child. Talk about child prodigies. You see, India's seen many Jesuses. And so has the world, other religions. These are great free souls. And you don't want to make this great freedom, do you want to put any narrowness on it or any hypocrisy on it. You want to keep it wide and free and open as it is. Because the world of Maya and the 3 worlds is always going to be trying to limit it. Just read the Beatitudes and so forth, or the Dhammapada, and you'll find out that this is right. This is what's happening. Well, I'm giving you a run through this chart. I think we've covered most everything. Again, Bur, Buvar, and Svahar. We'll go to this chart to explain a little bit more of the origins of that. But before we do, let's take the one chant on here that we haven't taken. Actually, there's, of course, the culprit itself. That's mind, in that little circle there with its radiation. It's called the antahakarana in our tradition. Antahakarana means antaha, inner, karana, cause. So it's the inner cause of everything. They've named it well. You need a big word like that in a foreign language to try and bring you to your senses about what mind really is. Not only that it's the kingdom of heaven, it's also the doorway to hell. And that's the chant I want to look at next here. The mind is the gateway to heaven. It can also be the doorway to hell. So Sri Ramakrishna said that in the Gospel. So let's look at the gateway to hell before our break, because this will give a little bit more convincing information about what that exactly is. So you see there, which basically is a frozen river. When I saw this image, one of my students had taken a shot of it, I think in Canada or in Alaska, in a cold winter up north, that the actual river and the waterfall and everything is just frozen on the outside. So I thought, wow, perfect analogy or metaphor for the mind, frozen in bondage. So I used it as the background. Actually, we used it as a cover of the Nectar of Non-Dual Truth in one issue too. But for the background for these teachings in the Viveka Chudamani by Shankara. And this comes from sloka 321 through 329, Viveka Chudamani. You know, if you're not really familiar with our scriptures or with these teachings of Vedanta, Viveka means discrimination between what is real and what is not real, or what is substantial, what is insubstantial, or what is changeless and what's changing. And Chudamani means kind of a crown, a jewel. So this is the crest jewel of spiritual discrimination. So in Vedanta we take that very seriously. We say there are many people who are proclaiming that they live a spiritual life, but they haven't even begun to renounce the world yet. In Vedanta we notice that is true. And in Buddhism they say if you don't accept the first noble truth, then you can't be a Buddhist. The first noble truth is there is suffering. So we have people running around as so-called Buddhists who are enjoying the world and trying to grasp it, you see, and take it to themselves. And even when they do their altruistic activities, they're doing it as if the world is real. That's the really strange thing that some of the more intelligent people can't fathom. Wait a minute, you just renounced the world and you said that it was full of suffering, but yet you're trying to help it? So immediately they say, oh, you're callous, you see. I said, no, we're practical as Vedantists. We know we can't help anything here. It's all Maya. Maya is actually going to help itself to us if we're not careful. So we have to take a different station, a different asana, a different posture of simultaneous detachment, knowing the world to be unreal, and then working to help others. So we're really trying to help Purusha get out of its cocoon of ignorance. Prakriti doesn't need our help. We have to be careful of Prakriti, nature. That's 24 cosmic principles. Mind as upper Prakriti. And so you have to be very careful of that because it traps you in, like the Prakriti layas. You can start fashioning worlds. This is where the idea of cloud castles in the sky came from. Is the idea that, you know, you can look up there and start imagining all sorts of things. But the same thing happens when you look in, you leave the body and you start fashioning worlds inside, or you have fashioned them already. Because the teaching is that many people are, some of them have already died before they leave the body, you see. So they're just lying there in wait, and they're thinking about these worlds. What am I going to do when I get out of the body? So they're visiting them. It's called dreaming. Sometimes it's called fantasizing. It's really a kind of projection or thinking process going on. Like when our founder, Lexixon, passed away, he was talking to the family. He said, yeah, he said, they asked him, what are you doing here at the time when he was about to pass? He said, well, I think about food, and I think about how to explain these teachings to others, spiritual teachings to others. So food is the gateway to all the worlds. If you're going to come back and help others, you're going to need food on all levels. And that food has to be sacred. So don't get me started, as they say. We'll go on a whole level of pure food and prana and how food is Brahman and all of that in our tradition. And that's going to open up everything from Vedanta to Kundalini Yoga. But what we really want to stick to here is the fact that he was also thinking about how to make these teachings presentable to other beings. At the time of his passing, he was thinking this. So let's take another person who's laying there thinking, oh, I want to go visit my ancestors. I really want to see my lover again. That person is gone, and where have they gone? Can I find them again? And so they're thinking in terms of form and name and visiting inner states. To them, it doesn't really occur that there's no God or that there's no heaven. They've already decided there is. So there might as well be. Because the whole thing has been done in Maya by the mind. See? The whole thing has been enacted already. So it's just a remembrance, returning to a memory, and then taking on a new body and having more memories, and piling more gloom on gloom. Till pretty soon, you know, you're caught in this samsaric wheel. And, you know, of a three-world kind of idea, earth, heaven, and hell. Because, I mean, this could also be hell. Mind is the gateway to heaven. It's also the doorway to hell, if you're not careful. Of course, there are 7 other patalas, if you want to look into them. There's another chart I have on that. Those are the hell realms. And they're presided over by 7 other rishis. So basically, we're not going to get to the full thing before our break because we're running out of minutes here. We can start with this chart afterwards, but if it is this gateway to hell for many people, because hell can be anything from monotony, like I teach people in prison, so that the hell is really pretty much monotony. They're getting their meals, and they're having some people who are friends and so forth, and they're having to live their lives, and they're taken care of in many ways. Of course, they're under the press of government and officials and various things, but monotony would really be the kind of hell that gets to a lot of people. So you could say a hell has many, many faces. It's not just physical suffering that we think of, or being burned a lot. See, please don't fricassee me, O Lord, or boil me in a pot, or in a vat, or in a wok. See, in some strange hell. So there are many kinds of hells that are going on, and the point here too is that they are all of the making of the mind. The mind has fashioned these, and has also fashioned the heavens. Now you see where the teaching of Vedanta is that Brahma Satya Jagad Mithya, that Brahman is real and the worlds are unreal. People get that thorn from Vedanta. Oh, the worlds are unreal, I don't like that, you see. But heaven and hell, both unreal. If you know that they're projections of the mind, projections can't be real, they're just like projections on a screen, see. They're not real, and it doesn't affect the screen. You have to go up and examine that. There's the screen afterwards. Oh, somebody cried up there, but the screen's not wet, you see. An explosion went off, but the screen's not ripped, you see. So the whole thing, as Vedanta would explain it, is reflections on the screen, and the screen backdrop is the indestructible, unchanging Brahman. The projector up there in the theater, back of the theater, is the mind, and life and all of names and forms and time and space are what's being projected on the unchanging background of Brahman. It's a beautiful metaphor that's been used quite a bit. It's good to bring it back again. But if you notice, what's going on the screen is both heaven and hell. That is, heaven and hellish things are going on all the time. So after the break, and I hope you all stay with us, and thank you for being here. If you're watching from various places in the world, some of my students on the live streaming, we will take a look at, out of this chart, at this one little saying of Sri Ramakrishna, is how the mind can be the gateway to heaven, but it can also be the doorway to hell. Stand by for that, please. Jai Shri Guru. Namaste.